a new museum, the Broad, which will be on Grand Avenue in downtown Los Angeles, which will be the centerpiece of our discussion in the next few minutes. The architect is Liz Diller of the firm of Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro. DS&R has made a remarkable mark around the world in the last few years. They began as a firm that did art pieces and intellectual inquiries as much as real buildings, and they have now moved into a phase of extraordinary and significant work, from the, I think, quite brilliant redo of the campus of Lincoln Center in New York to the High Line and numerous other projects. And to Liz's right is Joanne Heyler, founding director of the Broad and the longtime director and chief curator of the Broad Art Foundation. Joanne has helped both Eli and Edith Broad for close to 2 decades in assembling the collection of the foundation and filling it with work of critical post-war artists. Let me just say before we start that this talk is being recorded. It will be available on the Broad Museum's website, thebroad.org, at some later point. And we hope to have some time for a few questions toward the end. To that end, we will demonstrate the Broad's deep commitment to the most advanced technology by asking you to tweet your questions to @thebroad. So please submit them via Twitter. We'll try to get to several of them, and the advantage of that is that if we don't get to that many, we can continue the conversation via Twitter after this hour. We will stop very promptly at 10:30 so as to allow all of us to make it across the street in time for the opening of that thing over there where they show some art. Let me begin, if I may, with a question to Eli about why you chose to build a brick-and-mortar museum at this moment. After all, the Broad Foundation had done really well at creating what was effectively a new model, this idea of the private collection as a lending library. So why go from a museum without walls to a museum with them?
Well, it's been an evolution. We started with a personal collection.
Right.
And 30-some-odd years, about 30 years ago, when the walls were all filled, we said, you know what? We want to keep collecting, but we don't want to collect and put everything in storage. So we created the Broad Art Foundation, which between the two collections have 2,000 works. Where are the works? Well, 6 different storage facilities.
Okay.
In Culver City and El Segundo. A separate building in Santa Monica, which has some gallery space, but isn't open to the public.
That's the building where the offices are.
Exactly.
Yes, right.
So we thought the time had come where we want to continue our mission of being a lending library, and we've made 8,000 loans to 500 different institutions over those 30 years. But also wanted to show the work to the public in Los Angeles. So we ended up deciding to build a building, to put all the work in most all the work in one building, have offices there, and public exhibition space.
Right. And in fact, will it be able to house the entire collection?
Most things. But we've got some very large things we can't house.
Right, and you're continuing to acquire
We
as
sure
well.
are. We sure are.
There's a Charles Ray fire truck in the collection that doesn't happen to fit in the building.
Well, you can
in
park
the
it out
storage.
front, though, can't
But
you?
we could.
We
Actually,
could,
yes.
I mean, it would.
And hope to
I
someday.
think it would bring some welcome color to Grand Avenue, maybe.
And we're excited about being on Grand Avenue. As you know, I was involved in creating the Walt Disney Concert
Yeah, I
Hall.
know.
And then I was I chaired something called the Grand Avenue Committee.
Right.
In the last 10 years on Grand Avenue, We have a new arts high school by Wolf Prix.
Right. That's across the freeway.
Yeah, cathedral by Raphael Maneo.
Right.
We've got Mocha by Izasaki. We've got our building. We've got the Colburn School of Music. So within 3 blocks, I can't think of any city that has great architecture within 3 blocks.
Right, right. Well, you've given us a perfect segue into the architecture of this building. Let me ask first, if we can stay with you, Eli, for one more moment. How did you get to Liz? I mean, her reputation, the reputation of Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro has been growing exponentially in the last few years. But you didn't go to her without looking at a broader list, as I recall.
Well, we
right?
did
What was
have
it? Can you talk about the process?
We did have an international competition. We had a jury. We knew of Liz's work from the first time we saw her work at the Whitney Museum. I forget how many years ago, 10?
Oh, God, yeah.
Well, I remember that big, the retrospective. Right.
And then, of course, we were familiar with ICA and so on. So we selected her firm together with 5 others.
Right.
And at the end of the day, we came to the conclusion she had the best answer. How do you build a building next to Walt Disney Concert Hall without clashing, but you don't want to be anonymous either? And she and her people came up with a great answer. The veil and the vault, which we'll tell you about.
All right. Liz, take it from there.
Wow.
Well, no, seriously, Eli has actually set forth a key part of the problem, which is that the context is particularly challenging. It's an interesting irony that here we are in a wonderful Frank Gehry building, and this site is next door to what I think may be the greatest Gehry building, certainly in the country, if not the world, and probably I think the greatest public building built in this country in the last generation. But it's a challenge because you don't want to lie down and play dead next to it, but on the other hand, it's not an easy building to be a neighbor of.
Right.
So can you talk about both, and perhaps Joanne, you might want to chime in here too, about the program of the museum, which I know called for storage as a significant element as well as public exhibition space, and the challenge of Frank next door, so to speak.
Wow. Okay, so many challenges there. Los Angeles, Grand Avenue, Frank Gehry,
and
Eli. And Eli.
Eli is not a challenge. Eli, come on.
But I have to, when I think back to the competition, it was, we were unlikely. We thought, wow, we were just totally, just so thrilled to be even considered. I thought unlikely choices, but we, when we looked at the site and we looked at the neighbor, we realized very, very quickly that because the site is really limited, it's only 200 feet wide and deep, and you could only build up to an envelope of 70 feet. You can see it on the screen. That is just so much smaller than Disney Hall, and the program that Eli and Joanne had established almost exceeds the box. Okay. So there was a kind of inevitability that it had to fit, and it couldn't be exuberant in the way that sculpturally that Disney Hall was exuberant. So it had to find a very, very different kind of language, a different way of speaking. And we decided very early there was no way to compete, that we were just going to do something that was really great for the collection, would make a really great museum. But there were some I'll just point out a couple of specific things. Oops, sorry.
Pointer here.
Yeah. I could find that this was a kind of going metaphor here. Now this isn't working. Yeah. That there was going to be a real distinction between Gehry's building. Gehry's building is very sculptural. It's metallic. It's shiny. What we wanted to do as a museum and to really make the space feel great is to make it very porous and bring in light through all of the surfaces, and make the building more like a sponge, and maybe in terms of its apertures, and make it kind of leaky.
So a sense of texture without being sculptural in the same way that
Exactly.
Gary is. Yeah.
It's a kind of texture which admits the exterior space in some way. So it's a very different way of dealing with space.
Right.
I love how, Disney Hall as a performance space,
Right.
like this space, is about actually keeping the outside world outside and creating a suspension of reality here. Whereas the building that Liz has designed for us with her team actually in a very calibrated way brings light in to meet the art and brings the outside world in that sense into the building, whereas Gary's building, the Disney Hall, is always projecting light back out, reflecting it back out through.
Sometimes rather too much, in fact. Yes, but that's
Some have found it to be too much.
Another
The
discussion
local-
for another day. Yes.
That's right.
Right.
So this was, we thought, a really brilliant way to address and create a real counterpoint that we had never thought of. For this building living next door, but also not in a decorative sense, but also
Right.
that made sense with the program, with what the museum needed to do.
Right.
I wanted to just illustrate
Sure.
this
Yeah.
veil and vault
Right.
idea, which was the key architectural idea. And I also want to introduce Rick Scofidio over there, Kevin Rice, and Ben Gilmartin, who are also integrally involved in all the design. The key idea and one of the challenges, of course, was that this is a storage facility and also an exhibition space.
Right.
And there's a certain proportion. And when you look at the quantity of space actually that is the storage right on Grand Avenue, how do you deal with that? How do you, typically these kinds of programs are hidden from view.
Yes.
They're in basements, they're off-site facilities, there's some in the back of house. Well, we wanted to make that space that holds the work, pre-curated work, if you will, right there in public view. And it's always something that you feel, that you see from the street. You understand it when you come into the building, you're underneath it, you shoot through it when you arrive at the upper gallery, you're standing on top of this vault. You come back through it, in an interesting way to see what's in the archive. And so the vault is this key element, the storage, and then the veil, which is this kind of brittle structural element which allows light to come in from all sides, is the outer component. And really, it's as simple as that. And I think that triggered, a reaction. It's a very, very simple plan, very simple section, and really dealt with the uniqueness of this project being both storage and exhibition.
Right.
In a way, that honors the tradition of the collection, really, doesn't it? By making storage not disappear, but making it into an architectural element in itself.
No.
Yeah. Will you see, as you enter at ground level, and then you rise through the vault to reach the galleries above, will you see into it? Will you see the art stored? I mean, it's not just a long, dark tunnel going through.
It's actually, it's sort of a long, dark tunnel.
Oh, okay. All right, it is a long, dark tunnel.
In one direction it is.
Right. And so the idea fundamentally is that you come from the street.
Yes.
And the veil actually opens up its edges, its corners, and it's very porous to the street. That's something that was very important to us in relationship to Grand Avenue and other urbanistic aspirations. But you come and you shoot, you're under this very weighty vault, and you shoot right through. You end up on top. And we thought that being on top of this, it's like the top of the suitcase or something. Everything gets unpacked above, and then gets repacked and unpacked again. And but there is, when you arrive on this top of the vault, you're in a 35,000 square foot. It's almost an acre worth of art space, and that was to us a sublime moment because there are no columns at all. It's 200-foot spans under this filtered light, and so you have your experience with the art, and on the way down, so that's the space. And then when you start to descend on your way out, it's a much more circuitous route. that brings you into the collection, and you see behind the scenes, you see the pre-curated materials, and then you make your way out. But what was very important to us with that route, with that concept, was that this is a collection, that this isn't just a big museum. It's not an encyclopedic museum. It's not a museum of a particular. It's actually a collection of a collector. That's very. It has its own idiosyncrasies, and we have to be reminded that this is a collection. It's a very, very unique kind of thing, and it's just not a typical museum. So I think that behind the scenes also offers that opportunity. That's the stuff you're going to see again in a different way, reshuffled in a different way.
You'll come back on another day and see more things that what you see in storage you may see in the galleries the next time. In other words,
And I joke with Eli frequently now that I now have to curate storage as well as the galleries themselves. So
Right.
And you have some performers that act as
pre-curate storage, I guess. Yeah.
The closet is going to be open to public view, not just the living room, right? But the closet as well, right. Let's step away from the building for a moment and talk a little bit about that idea. Eli, what kind of what kind of public museum that is based on a private and personal collection offer that an encyclopedic museum does not? Can you speak to that for a moment?
Sure.
Yeah.
We've got a collection we're very proud of, 5 decades of art, and we're very fortunate to have started with Jeff Koons is here with us today early on, and I believe we have the biggest collection of his work. Cindy Sherman, Jean-Michel Basquiat, and many others.
Right.
And I can't see any museum that would have the space to show all of this.
Right.
So we want to show these things in some depth. And not only will we have the opening, but after the opening, we expect we'll probably have 3 different exhibitions a year of works from our collection and perhaps some other works.
Okay. So really being able to own and display and effectively study and present works in depth of a particular artist is one thing that that
While
the collection can
continuing
do that an encyclopedic museum generally would not do.
and continue our lending exhibit, lending program.
Right. Okay. Which will go on even after the new building.
Absolutely.
Okay. That is important. I'm curious. It seems as if we're almost at a moment where there's the beginnings of a backlash against the huge encyclopedic museum in favor of the single collector museum, which was, it seems to me at least, a type that yielded such extraordinary things as the Frick, the Gardner, the Huntington near you in Los Angeles, but then began to fade, and now we seem to be seeing more of them. I mean, I think of there's another great Jeff Koons at Glenstone, the Rails collection, where a new museum is being built. There's the Broad, there are others. Any thoughts about the larger trend? Are we, in fact, in a period of greater interest in individual collections than we had been before? You think?
Well, throughout the history of time, you've had individual collections.
Right.
You didn't mention Norton Simon, for example.
Right, it's true. Who was a very important early Los Angeles.
And then, of course, the Getty.
Right.
You mentioned Huntington.
Yes.
So I don't think it's a trend.
Okay.
I think we need encyclopedic museums, but we also need museums that show individual collectors' work if they have a quality collection and great depth.
I mean, the Getty is such an enormous institution, it sort of loses those qualities of being personal, which it seems there's a very strong effort to hold on to at the Broad, that your collecting thinking will remain in the indefinite future. It will have its mark on that building, hopefully, right?
Yeah, I think that's true. And, I think that the question about single patron museums or single collection museums versus encyclopedic reminds me a lot of the debate that comes back and forth in the art world about the difference between a blockbuster exhibition approach versus a more
Right.
off the radar type of exhibition,
Yes.
or more exploratory exhibitions. And I've always thought that just as in a large institution you would want to have a healthy grouping of both those types of shows, in a city with a healthy cultural ecosystem, you want both kinds of institutions.
Right.
You want the encyclopedic institution, but then it's also interesting to have an individual point of view.
Right.
And have that, and there's value to having that be on its own, and something that is presented as a moment in collecting, or more than a moment,
Right.
half a century plus of collecting. So.
Well, it's also, it's an interesting phenomenon, and it's not necessarily new, but that it's happening more, that collectors are able to build buildings and
Right.
are willing to put their collections into the public realm. And that's a really big deal.
No, I think it's a very big deal. That's why I'm
wanna do
making
it.
a point of it. I think it's a wonderful thing, whether it's a trend or not. I mean, clearly, of course, it goes back a long way in time, but it seemed as if the Encyclopedic Museum was taking over for a while, and now there's a lot of attention again being paid to individuals, which brings a degree of just personal engagement that you don't always have in an encyclopedic museum, even a very fine one.
Well, and there are many different types of museums also. There's Kunsthalls, and
Right.
there are different types for different purposes. But the notion of collecting, and I don't know, Eli, when you started collecting, did you ever imagine that you would collect so much that at a certain point you needed to share it with other people? Is there a turning point in collecting?
This wasn't a plan we created 30 years ago. No, we never thought that we'd end up with a collection of over 2,000 works.
So there's a tipping point, kind of, that happens, I think. And if you have the ambition to actually, to collect that much, then there's a point where making it public
Right.
becomes almost like a, part of the ethos of,
Sure.
Our mission is to show our collection the widest possible audience, hence the lending program. But also now that we have the building on Grand Avenue, we hope to have larger tenants.
Right.
Let's talk more about the building again, if we can come back to that for a moment. Liz, can you talk about how light will work inside the building, how it's filtered, what the mechanisms are, what the experience of light will be in those top floor galleries?
Yeah. Now, this, I guess, we could turn to one of the actually in construction right now.
So these are
shots.
What you're about to show us is a photograph.
Yeah, this is actually a photograph of the top gallery. That's it's about 35,000 square feet, and totally column free.
Right.
The orientation of the building and the orientation of the grid of the skylights is kind of roughly 45 degrees. So the skylights are facing pure north. And this is engineered in such a way, not only the skylights, but also the side walls and the wall on Grand Avenue. Although all the sides of the vault are engineered so that no direct sun ever penetrates.
Okay.
And where we are looking on the north, basically that's more repetitive. But when you get to the sides, it's very unique because the sun is moving around and facing different orientations. So the geometries of all the edges, the corners, tops and bottoms, and all of that become very unique. So the idea is a kind of cellular structure that's on all sides that allows, kind of like the sponge, for light or for the atmosphere to come in. And we're looking at it right now without, this is incomplete, but you will see, basically this very, very, very simple grid. It will be against the normal grid of the walls. So it's something that is always kind of noticed. The walls will never be higher, I think, than 16 or 18 feet. So you will always feel the breadth of the space, all the corners.
The space itself is how high?
It's 23 feet,
23 feet.
To the underside of the skylights.
Yeah. And then the skylights themselves are 14 feet or so tall.
They're quite deep because
Yeah.
the structure that is basically holding the
So
roof
it's-
up is right inside.
It's pretty monumental in scale then, it sounds.
It's,
Or-
well, I would say that,
or it's certainly civic scale, let's say, not domestic scale.
yeah, I think that, for us, we were very interested, one, in the architectural experiment and also making a gallery that is as perfect as we could make it. And part of that is that it will be subdivided, through its long life, in many different ways.
Right.
According to curators' desires. But the fact that it doesn't have a single column allows unlimited flexibility.
Right.
And if all the walls are removed, the space itself has a very strong character of this very, sublime light. And you do feel this absence. Where are the columns? It feels that big and unusual that that the columns are absent. And that was what we were.
Will it be hard for you to actually see walls dividing it up? Of course. I would think there must be some instinct that says, leave it alone, don't touch it, just put sculpture in there, and never mind the thing.
We're working on Eli to put as few linear miles of walls as possible. There's a huge collection, and there's a desire to show a lot of it. But I think that if, with different kinds of shows, there'll be different densities of walls and different, and hopefully at the very beginning you'll be able to really appreciate.
But now the exterior walls will always be the porous. You'll perceive the veil, right? They will never be covered by display space. Or will they be?
No. The veil actually will always be.
You'll always be able to read the veil.
We want people to be able to read the veil, at least in places. And I always joke with Liz that this is her preferred opening installation.
Right. Now that's kind of what that's kind of where I was going a moment ago. Actually,
I was saying to Jeff that maybe just a couple of his sculptures.
His pieces in the middle.
Would be perfect.
Just fine. Right.
I would say, it was a big commitment to go for the veil in terms of the side lighting. The skylight is very dramatic, but it is, I see it frequently now on the site itself, and it's partly because of the height and partly just because of the elegance of the design, it is going to interact well with the artwork. And the side lighting, I think, meaning, the vertical part of the veil that you'll see through glass in the gallery, I think is something that I'm looking forward to working with, in terms of relating the collection to it. And I tend to feel at this point in time that a building with a strong gesture is actually a desirable thing. Makes things interesting.
You are a museum director for an architect to love. When I hear those lines, the veil is really, in a way, though, it seems to me a misnomer to refer to it as simple, because there's an extraordinary number of different kinds of pieces in it, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's sort of. It looks like all one even pattern, but it's continually changing so that the actual dimensions of each piece are not the same. Is that correct?
Now you're giving Eli indigestion.
It's easy to love and hard to build.
Easy to love and hard to build. Okay, fair enough. I mean, I presume it's something that only digital technology would make possible, right?
Well, in fact, this model, this is a 3D print that we made in our studio, and it's showing the sidewall and the way that the sidewall comes up to meet the ceiling skylights. So the geometries are super complicated because there's a certain rationale, and it's very interesting, the kind of proportion the height of the gallery to the frequency of the electric lighting tracks, to the width and height of the skylights in terms of how much light. There's a whole science to how much light can come into the space.
Right.
And then relative to, the sizes of everything. So everything is modularized in a very, very particular way, and as it comes to the outside and hits the walls and the proportion of the building and the structural touchdown points and other kinds of features, corners, cornices, and all of that, it starts to get very, very complicated when you take a geometry and then you start to make something of it. And so, and here you could see a little bit of the geometry. Now, this is, in a funny way, what Joanne is saying, that it supporting something really unique in the process can also be very complex, and you get yourself into. Let me see, where are the miles of? Here. These are some of the elements that are being made, these cast forms. And we went through a lot of structural permutations.
That's actually quite a wonderful photograph. Just as an art piece in itself, that's a great photograph.
This is agriculture in California.
Right, exactly. Yes.
These are in Northern California. That's where they're being formed.
That's where they grow. That's where they're grown.
That's where they're growing.
Right.
Probably
yeah,
that was an
the
agricultural
soil
field
up there
at
is
one point.
much more suitable for
To growing a veil,
for it
yes.
than in Southern California. I know, right.
Yeah.
But we went through this incredible process because the one of the big ideas here was a very, very long structural span in which we thought about it two ways. We thought about it steel and clad in concrete, and then we thought about it as precast concrete. And then we went that direction for a while, and then we came back to steel and clad concrete. And
which is what these are.
Which is what this is. And the fact is the structure is because of the features, kind of what seems very simple is actually super complex. Maybe one of like here. This is a competition image. And what you're seeing are just conditions, top, edge, corners. There are only 3 touchdown points for this veil. And in fact, the front on Grand Avenue is now acting almost like a rocker in earthquake events.
Right.
Yeah,
this is the view from Grand Avenue,
Right.
and Disney Hall is to the right out of the image, right?
Exactly.
Okay,
And you see the
right.
vault just there,
Yeah.
that the gray. And so, but part of also the initiative for the veil, not only to bring light in, but to just have a more porous relationship between the big building on Grand Avenue, and the public, and the interior. There are places that you can actually look right through the veil and see the gallery, or even see up through the wall, through the veil to the skylights. And even when you're
from
driving,
the street, as
From the
you're
street.
as you're
walking
driving
or driving
walking.
by. Okay.
And so, just to come back to your question, it was super complicated, and the seismic issues and the very, very stiff codes make doing a structural experiment that much harder.
Yes.
So with this veil that you're seeing, there's something like 2,000 cast units, and there's something, in terms of unique forms, there's something like 300. And
So there are 300 types
300 unique types.
Among the 2,000.
Right. And so Eli, I think you have to ask now at this point, turn to Eli, because he's going to talk about the pain and torture.
Well, but
He's been very supportive.
I've got to say, Eli could have said no, and he did not. So.
He ain't talking.
I mean, right.
I think that we all, we
Yes.
as, architectural projects go, when there's a unique project, it takes everyone kind
Sure.
of being involved in the experiment. It's not always A to B in a straight line.
Right.
Sometimes you deviate this way, but you get there. And I think that we've gone through a couple of hiccups, but, we are on our way. It's being built, and it's and I think it's going to be really well worth.
Essentially true to its original concept,
In
right?
fact,
Oh, yeah.
very,
Yeah.
very, very close. If you look
Right.
at the original competition images, very few changes.
This is fundamentally what will be there.
We didn't have to make a new image.
Right. Okay. What is the indentation there, by the way? Is that purely sort of ornamental to kind of balance the corner entry recess, or does it serve some programmatic function in the building?
It actually is on the second level. We have the administrative level, also where the archive is, and the collection. And it's one area that is a public space, and it will be a lecture room. And it's what we're very interested in is having, marking this special spot on the surface of the building. That's a public part of the building. And so what happens is the veil actually penetrates the building edge, the vault edge. And there's a kind of inside-out effect where the glass, there's glass on the surface that is going to be revealed outside to, and this is a very, very complicated thing to pull off and to build.
Right.
So in the complex veil, you have this
even greater complexity here.
Yes, but we got rid of the kiss to that we got rid of other features. There were many things that were extra frills, but this was one that was really very, very important in the face and in the public recognition of where do I go? And there's a space that will be filled with programming.
I mean, to me, that gesture almost marks this building as a 21st century building, because you don't see that in other buildings in past decades that might have used a kind of concrete-based screen of some kind that's cast. And, so to have the ability to pull off those forms in that dramatic moment is very, I think, important to the expression of the building.
Although I think you're absolutely right, Joanne, but I think actually the entire nature of the veil marks it as a 21st century building, in that a building with a sort of pattern of cast concrete done in a previous time, all the pieces would have had to have been identical. Or it would have been impossible to design and engineer and construct. I think it's digital technology now that allows you to create the 300 variations on
I think it might be 400.
without, or 400, whatever, although without robbing Eli of every cent he planned to spend on buying more art. I mean, it's something that, like Frank Gehry has said very similar things about, like his tall apartment building in New York, which has those stainless steel panels on the outside. There are, I think, something like 9,000 panels and 6,000 or 7,000 variations, all of which could never have been done on a economic basis that a developer would be willing to build if it hadn't been for the technology of now.
This is very true. We modeled this in Digital Project, which is a kind of CATIA program, and we're able to, with that program, we're able to work on the surfaces. We're able to also look at it in layers, and structural layers, and glass layer, all the intersecting systems. We're able to then communicate with the guys that are doing the production, and some of the design of the veil, for example, going directly through to, it's all computerized, going to CNC milling machines, which are making the molds, and then concrete is going on top of that. So it has everything to do with the design, it has to do with the fabrication process, and it does allow us to do some more interesting things that would have been done before, economically.
Right, a degree of variation that could never have been possible before.
Exactly.
Right. No, I think that's... how will light... let me go back to the whole question of light. How will it work coming in from the side there?
From the sides.
It will not be... it will always be indirect as from the ceiling?
Yeah,
okay.
And so you see a little bit here that the orientation will always allow light to just come in and to be filtered. So you're never really, you can align yourself, with a couple of the veils, and you could just look down to Grand Avenue, for example, from the gallery. But you're really not going to be seeing out. You're just seeing indirect light coming into the space. And it's not an unfamiliar idea,
Right.
happens in churches all the time.
Sure.
And so you're seeing just this very soft light, that doesn't reach beyond a certain level. And it's very much, so what happens normally in north lights, in the ceiling, you can filter out direct sun very easily, but on the sides it becomes a little bit harder. And that's why these forms are twisting and reorienting and doing, and all of it is expertly engineered with a daylighting expert at Arup named Andy Sedgwick, who has done a lot of the buildings with Renzo Piano.
Yes, I know. Right. Great. Let me remind all of you again that please tweet your questions, and in a couple of minutes we'll try to turn to a few of them before we adjourn. Before we do that, though, let's look ahead to the completion of this building, which is now not imminent, but clearly foreseeable at this point. I won't ask you the difficult question of exactly when, but tell me roughly, and also what's being planned for the opening. Have you yet begun to program it and plan it?
We expect to have the building complete by the end of 2014, and Joanne will tell you what we're going to do at the opening.
Yep.
Okay.
We plan to open with the collection, but shown in a different way than it's been shown before. So, the collection through our loan program and through other venues has been shown to some extent, but what I think we haven't been able to do in the past is really display the collection in a truly chronological fashion to really allow it to tell its story, its part of the story of the era of art that it covers. And so we're planning to do a chronological hang through the top floor that extends into gallery space, which we focused for good reason on the third floor mainly, but we have another 15,000 square feet of gallery space on the first floor, and we'll continue the installation there. And then thereafter, we plan to have special exhibitions in that first floor
So that's
space.
at the street level.
And that's at the street level.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, and we also plan to have very, very diverse and rich set of offerings in terms of audience engagement. We plan to collaborate with, we have this great environment and context we'll be in. We're going to be across the street from MoCA. We're going to be across the street from Colburn School, as we've discussed, next door to Disney Hall, but also all of the many, many venues of the Music Center, including the opera, et cetera. And we're already in discussions with each of those venues about doing collaborative programming, even, for example, to have we're in a Frank Gehry space here. So if you're in Disney Hall, you might attend a performance and then attend the rest of the performance at the museum. So we're actually looking at some very unusual and creative ways to utilize the context we have there of great cultural neighbors.
Great. That's very exciting, actually.
Yeah,
Really,
and we'll also have a plaza outside of the museum. So we'll have a fairly nicely scaled space to have events on there as well. There'll be a restaurant on that plaza for dining all the time, and then we'll have special events occasionally on the plaza that connect to the collection, connect to the themes in the collection. So we're working up, and also we're working on digital projects, mobile apps and other things that'll also kind of help illuminate and animate the collection for visitors.
Are you commissioning any works of art, especially for the building?
We're thinking about it.
Okay.
We're thinking about it. Nothing we can announce yet, but
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. It's enticing.
We're working on this work of art at the
Right,
moment.
right, fair enough. Your mention of the public plaza and all that makes me want to ask a little bit more about Grand Avenue, Eli, if you can tell us a little, because those plans seem to be coming alive again after a period of relative dormancy for a couple of years after the economic downturn. Can you talk, even though we're in Miami, I think at this point Los Angeles is so well known to almost everybody that the question of downtown Los Angeles and its role and its revival is of interest to everybody.
You know, we got to Los Angeles 50 years ago, and I've always lamented the fact that Los Angeles did not have a vibrant center. And I can think of no city in the world today or in history that didn't have a vibrant center. And I look at Manhattan. Why Manhattan? Why do people come from the other boroughs, from New Jersey, from Connecticut, from Westchester? They come here for sports, entertainment, culture, civic activities, and so on. And that didn't happen in Los Angeles. Los Angeles was developed differently. So going back to 1979, when I was the founding chairman of MoCA, I always had a vision that this had to happen. And then we went ahead with Disney Hall. And Disney Hall became a catalyst for other things, looking at all the land on Grand Avenue that the city and county had. In addition to what I've already described, we built a park from City Hall to Music Center, which is very popular. And we're going to have a lot more going on.
Are people beginning to live there?
Oh, yes.
It seems to me that's key to really making a downtown neighborhood work.
Yeah. The number of residents downtown is going to double in the next 7 to 8 years.
Okay. Because that, I think, will really be the ultimate sign of its success.
And you've got more and more restaurants downtown. People are coming from throughout the entire region to go to restaurants downtown, which was not the case 10 years ago. And then several miles away, you have another area, which I call the Sports, Entertainment, and Convention District, LA Live. Which is drawing about 14 million people a year. That didn't exist 11 years ago.
You know, the revival of downtown LA, there have been other attempts to revive, you know, the scene there. But this time it's underpinned by infrastructure. You know, there's a light rail and metro subway system that's all centralized there. And in fact, we'll have a stop right next to the museum that'll open in 2019. So, you know, so there's that support for growth of the area in addition to all the other reasons that it's becoming more interesting as a residential place.
Is that likely to knit together the downtown core where the museum is and LA Live? Can those areas eventually become one? Because they're not far away.
They're less than 2 miles apart. And there's some thought about, there's a program to go ahead and build a streetcar line that connects the two.
Okay. We were supposed to get questions delivered, but they don't seem to have arrived. So I think actually...
Modern technology.
Okay, here they come. Thank you, good, okay. You see, in the most modern technology, at the end, it comes down to people. Thank you so much. Okay, we do have time for a couple of them. Let's start with one addressed to Eli Broad. Is art a matter of want or need or something else?
Want or need? Well, I like to say it becomes an obsession.
Okay.
You start collecting art, you love living with art, and then you become addicted to it. So I don't know if it's a want. I guess it's a need.
It's a want that becomes a need.
I think that's correct.
Okay. Fair enough. A question to Joanne. How do you differentiate yourself, and by yourself I think they mean the collection and the administration of the collection, from other private collections that are opening museums?
Well, you know, I think that each collection has its own sort of trajectory and sort of character that evolves over time. You know, this is a collection that's been in evolution for 3 to 4 decades. You know, I don't know what collections the person asking the question might have been thinking about, but you know, it's a very rare thing, really, to build a full-fledged museum such as we're doing. It happens, but very rarely. You know, even you know, Norton Simon, there was an existing building, right?
Yes.
So we're building a purpose-built, ground-up building for this collection.
Right.
I think architecturally and in terms of the content of the collection, the story it tells, but perhaps most especially the very long belief the Broads have had in collecting in depth. I mean, that's been something that has happened from the very beginning and results in 120 Cindy Sherman photographs in the collection, examples from every single body of work she's ever produced.
Right.
A complete collection of Joseph Beuys multiples, 570 works there. Over 30 works of Jeff Koons. That doesn't happen. It's not unheard of.
Right,
Other
okay.
collectors collect in depth, but perhaps not across the scope of artists.
In depth, but also with great breadth.
Yeah.
In other words, I think. Your mention of Cindy Sherman actually brings me to another question, which was to Liz. How will you be able to show Cindy Sherman with all that light? But
I think that's my problem.
But I think it seems to me as if you began to answer this by explaining how the light is really all indirect, not
Right,
direct. But will it work for photographs and works on paper?
Actually, yes, it should. From a environmental, all the environmental systems are, perfect to show anything, drawings, photography, everything. We can totally black out sections, galleries. We can build walls to the ceiling. So it's very flexible that way. The collection doesn't have a huge amount of video, right? So I remember when we were initially talking about it, which way should it go? Is it more sculpture, painting, then the upper level gallery really suits itself, to sculpture and painting, but it can show anything. And also the lower level gallery is also super flexible.
Yeah,
Although you don't want to show anything at the expense of losing all the architecture, right? I mean, if you were to cover everything, you could be anywhere.
Yeah,
on the third floor
Will
we
you
have...
be able to do this while still retaining a sense of where you are?
Yeah. Well, number one, the daylighting engineering has been done very carefully with our collection in mind. But also, as Liz was mentioning, as an extra kind of precaution on the third floor, we have blackout shades for each of the skylights that can be individually adjusted, and they have 8 positions, and so we have a lot of options for tuning the light even more than the skylight does itself. And then there's also the first floor gallery, where we can completely control the light altogether.
Good.
I think, Paul, just one thing that comes to mind that should be said, that the building of the building is like the start, the launch, and hopefully it sets a kind of feel, for the way that it's going to be used.
Right.
And we hope that that the veil will always be exposed and so forth, but we don't know. The moment we walk away, things happen, and it's not just curators; it's also when artists come in and they might be given the opportunity to do things to the building, and you kind of in a certain way that in a contemporary art setting. That what you're doing is you're just kind of, you're leaving the project at a certain moment in time, and it's going to grow and change.
And it also, you want to have confidence that the building is not so fragile.
Right.
It's not like a little orchid that's going to fall apart if you get tough with it. It should be able to take a certain amount of give and take.
It's pretty
and
robust,
jousting a little bit.
We were discussing the amount of concrete in the building, and I think it's in the north of 30 million pounds of concrete. So it's
right.
tough.
So this is not a fragile flower, a shrinking violet here. Okay. There is another question that speaks somewhat to that very issue, which is how will you handle enormous works of art going inside or outside the building? I mean, I don't know whether that question was meant to addresses the physical movement of them in or out or the display of them, but can you speak to that at all?
Well, we very carefully planned around the collection, of course, that almost everything, with the exception, as I mentioned in the beginning, of like incredible outsized things that need to be outside anyway, the Charles Ray fire truck, for
Right,
example.
right.
But, the freight elevator, for example, is exactly proportioned to handle a crate that holds a very large and beautiful 60s Ellsworth Kelly painting that we own, so on an angle in the elevator. So, but it will happen. And that's, I don't know, it's 20 feet wide or something by, I forget the exact dimensions, 12 feet deep or something like that. So we have the capability from a loading dock beneath the museum to bring everything up. And having one of the advantages to have, just on a practical level, of having loaned the collection is that I and my staff have seen all sorts of loading and all sorts of situations that don't work.
Right. You know where it can go and how it can.
So we
how
kind
to
of
move
know what
everything.
we're doing in that regard.
I do want to.
Yes.
I want to point out that in the competition, we had the Charles Ray fire truck parked actually in the museum, and it looked like a fire station, right? Inside, but with the outside visibility. So is this a museum? Is this a fire station? And it had that kind of double identity. It didn't remain there, but
We hadn't had a chance to tell her
That's
it doesn't break down.
the fire truck that the Whitney had on Madison Avenue once, right?
Yes.
During the
Yes.
Biennale.
Yeah, that's in our collection.
Right. I remember that.
And then
Great.
Mocha had it in front of Mocha
Right,
on
right.
Grand Avenue many years
A
ago.
long time ago.
And
Yeah.
are you going to bring it back to on Grand Avenue?
I'd like to.
We're
Okay.
thinking
would be
about
nice.
Yeah.
Great, wonderful. We are out of time, so let me first thank the three of you for being here and making all this
Thank you.
possible. And then thanks to all of you for getting up early. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
To Art Basel. Thank you.
Art
Okay.
Basel.
Off to Art Basel. Thank you. Good.
I think
Great, that was great.
went well.